create new obligations and new responsibilities in this increasingly interdependent world. My own country and the other developed nations of the world cannot continue to diet while others starve, to build millions of automobiles while most of the world goes without shoes, to spend $100 billion on armaments while the developing nations cannot afford to spend $10 billion that they desperately need for the growth and the welfare of their people. If your efforts are to be successful, we must step up the flow of technical assistance and productive investment from the north to the south, as well as our efforts to widen the channels of trade, to secure more stable commodity prices, and to prevent severe foreign exchange shortages. For as President Kennedy once said at the outset of his administration, if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, how can it save the few that are rich? This has to be a world of two neighbors. The objective of everybody in this room, everybody in this nation, everybody in this part of the world, as it is and must be in my country, the United States. For unless it is, how can we build a world in which all of our children, white, black, yellow, and brown, can live in hope and can live in peace? Whatever today we pick up the tangled skein of human existence, we find that its problems are not one of one continent, or one people, or one race, or one country. All of us together, we have to, all of us, find the preconditions of peace. All of us together must work to build a just and a cooperative worldwide economic order. All of us together must learn to be not strangers, but friends. Together then, through our own governments, through our worldwide institutions, the United Nations, the international agencies, the growing network of regional organisms, let us find new ways to build up jointly the fabric of a peaceful world. And here in the capital city of so many continental hopes and so many opportunities, let me greet you as co-workers in the city of man. Thank you very much.
I'd like to add here, in trying to avoid or to break the stalemate that's being faced by, but despite of all these hopes,
the council members, the distinguished Foreign Minister of Ethiopia, His Excellency Atokatama Ifru, to present to the distinguished gathering the Honorable Senator Robert Francis Kennedy, so that he may give his address. Thank you.
F. Kennedy, United States Senator from New York. As years ago, Senator Kennedy is a young man leading that in this very room, 3 years ago, the Organization of African Unity, which is shaping the future of the African continent, was born. I present to you the distinguished United States Senator from New York, the Honorable Robert F. Kennedy.
Of hunger and disease, and poverty and fear and injustice. But these great purposes, peaceful coexistence, economic growth and cooperation, the dignity of man, are not just for African visions. These are the great visions of all of the family of man. In these aspirations, Africa confronts other continents on the basis of profound equality, of need, and of opportunity. The whole human experiment will fail unless it can find unity and mediate its disputes, unless it can follow the paths of economic growth and cooperation, unless, above all, it can realize the equality and the brotherhood of all man all over this globe. These are not cliches for anybody. They are the bare essentials of survival for all of us in this room and all that we speak for. And on this small, vulnerable, infinitely interdependent planet, all of us are seeking solutions. Under the spur of potential plenty, as under the shadow of potential destruction, we, all of us, are one. Our triumphs and our defeats are common. The bell tolls for us all. What do these great but still abstract visions in concrete terms mean for all of us, for Africa, and for our wider global society? First, really, is a search for peace. We must create institutions of mediation, of arbitration, of peaceful settlement, impartial law and impartial policing to resolve disputes in the world community. We have begun with the United Nations. It has no mandatory police power, but in crises such as Palestine and in the Congo and in Cyprus, it has acted as the alternative to local war, or worse still, to great power confrontations. We must strengthen the United Nations, and the African nations can provide the initiative and the leadership for doing just that. This effort should not and cannot be left merely to the large powers. This is a matter of survival for the small powers as well. African nations, combined with the other countries of Latin America and Asia, should lead the way in extending the United Nations' impartial authority and impartial power, and in the building of a structure of functioning world law under the International Court of Justice. To this structure, Ethiopia has already made major contributions, including the sacrifices that you made for the United Nations in Korea and in the Congo. But more must and more can be done. Clearly, the more disputes that can be peacefully settled at the local level, the less we shall strain the larger and the weaker fabric of peace. Nuclear destruction hangs in the balance, and your help is desperately needed. At Geneva, the disarmament conference has stalled, with no further progress being made toward a treaty to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Such a treaty is essential to the future of our world and, more importantly, of our children's world. If nuclear weapons spread, the chances of general nuclear war will be drastically increased. And we know that if a nuclear war were to break out, even between small nations, it would be extremely hard to stop a step-by-step progression of local war into a general conflagration. Hundreds of millions of people in my country, yes, in the Soviet Union, in Europe,
We are sitting here in Africa Hall in near darkness. Suddenly, rather melodramatically, just as Senator Kennedy was in the middle important part of his speech, the lights in this very modernistic... Okay. We are sitting here in Africa Hall in almost complete darkness. Suddenly, melodramatically, right in the middle of the most important part of Senator Kennedy's speech, the lights went out. There's apparently been a power failure of some sort here in the hall. The senator is sitting calmly. He left the podium and went back to his seat at the stand where he is surrounded by leaders of other African nations, the Ethiopian government. Mrs. Kennedy is in a balcony up above. We saw her smiling when the lights came back on briefly after they first failed. At that point, Senator Kennedy quipped, maybe it would have been better, meaning his speech would have been better in the dark. Then the lights went out again. There was a roar of laughter here in the hall. The joke is beginning to wear a little thin at this point. We've been going for several minutes now. The only lights in the hall at the moment are being furnished by the television lights, the lights that are used for the television cameras here in the hall. Senator Kennedy is in complete darkness. That light is focusing on the other cameraman at the moment. We're sure the lights will go back on again in just a moment or two, but it's apparently going to be a little time before the senator is able to resume his speech. Want to cut there?
Issue, the question of nuclear destruction, hangs in the balance, and your help is needed. At Geneva, the disarmament conference is stalled, with no further progress being made toward a treaty to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Such a treaty is essential to the future of our world, and more importantly, our children's world. If nuclear weapons spread, the chances of general nuclear war will be drastically increased. And we know that if a nuclear war were to break out, even between small countries, it would be extremely hard to stop a step-by-step progression of local war into a general conflagration. Hundreds of millions of people in my country, in the Soviet Union, in Europe, Asia, and here in Africa would die within the first 24 hours of a full-scale nuclear exchange. And as Chairman Khrushchev said, the living will envy the dead. For the toll of radioactive fallout, of chance missiles, of social and economic dislocation on a worldwide scale would be incalculable. Even nations with no part in the conflict whatever, unaffected directly by such a war, would find themselves without markets for their goods, without assistance for their development, without the accumulated wisdom and experience of a world community. So your stake, Africa's stake, in a non-proliferation treaty is as great as the stake of those of the great powers. Your voice must be heard. For the great powers, divided by suspicion and hostility, and misplaced reliance on nuclear weapons for their own security, are simply not doing enough, not trying hard enough, not sacrificing enough to arrive at an agreement. The United States and the Soviet Union seem unable to resolve their differences over this issue and over the issue of nuclear weapons for Germany. India and other powers on the nuclear threshold are tempted by the prospect of nuclear power, and China and France seem unwilling even to negotiate toward an end to these awesome weapons. You must therefore assume a responsibility, an even greater responsibility than you've assumed in the past.